Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to Season 3 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by multidisciplinary artist Andrew Cloninger. Andrew is a musician and producer in the band Wrencove, and he's also a poet who recently released his first book of haiku entitled C6 to C7 on Atmosphere Press. His book of original poems is about becoming disabled and overcoming adversity to understand who you are and what your identity is after everything changes. This week, Andrew and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs. 2 are his picks and 2 are mine. For the best listening experience, I recommend tuning into the show on Spotify. There, you can hear the show with the songs we discuss incorporated. You can also find the show on Apple, Amazon Music, or wherever you stream. But if you're not listening on Spotify, be sure to give the playlist a listen and then tune into our conversation. With that, let's get started. Andrew, what are you listening to this week?
Today I'm listening to 2 songs. I have one is called Impossible Germany by Wilco, and the other one is called The Silence by Manchester Orchestra.
Oh, I'm so excited to get into these 2 songs with you, Andrew. First song, as you mentioned, is a song called Impossible Germany by Wilco. And I mean, we could do many shows only on Wilco and like all the iterations from the band members that have spun off, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I love all of them, I have to say. I'm such a huge fan. You'll see when we transition to my picks that I kind of stayed in a similar lane. But Wilco has always been a band that I can go back to and like reliably count on for just the song that I need to hear in a given moment. You know, I think I love this song. I love this Sky Blue Sky album that this is on. I also love their debut album, an album called AM. I find myself going back to a song called Box Full of Letters a lot. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
You're familiar with that one, but I've always been drawn to the line, I just can't rhyme. I can't write my mind the way I want it to read. I always thought that was such a great line. But this song is filled with them as well. Tell me about Impossible Germany and why this was your first pick this week.
Well, for me, it's one of those songs like it encompasses everything that I'm into. Like, I'm into punk rock. I'm into folk music. I'm into, abstract music. And like, and Tweety comes from that like Bob Dylan, like school of songwriting, where it's a little abstract, but there's a lot of truth in there. And there's like something like he's really into the metaphor. And like that to me is the biggest, like, takeaway from Jeff Tweedy's art, like as far as lyric writing goes. He's got this thing, but he's also very subversive, like as far as music goes. He's like yeah, we're gonna play in some weird time signatures, and I'll put an acoustic guitar on it, but we're gonna also shred. So like, and also it's interesting too about the because I think he listen secretly he listened to a lot of Bruce Springsteen and a lot of like Bob Seger. Yeah. And my thing is, as a Michigan man, I grew up in Michigan. Bob Seger is way better than Bruce Springsteen anyway. So like, we're just going to throw that out there. Silver Bullet Band crushes anyway, but like, so like, you can hear that because of the, he's got a 3 guitar attack. He's got this great rhythm section, and it's like, and everything about that, the amalgamation, and then Niles Klein is like one of the shredding punk rockers you'll ever hear. Like, you talk about like virtuoso, like, and you're not supposed to be that, I mean, he played with like Mike Watt, who's, the
Yeah.
Minutemen, and like, all the different iterations of like some very experimental music. Did a lot of no wave. I think he's played with Zorn,
And
who's
you can go way down that rabbit hole like all day long with people that have traveled in and out of Wilco,
oh
not
yeah,
just, not just Wilco being sort of this side project or spinoff after Uncle Tupelo dissolved, and,
right.
Wilco sort of being owned by Jeff Tweedy and Jay Farrar sort of owning Sunvolt. Like it's like
Hmm.
you said, you have these musicians that come in all the time. And when you talk about a song like Impossible Germany, I think, a kid or a younger person would listen to that and hear us having a conversation about punk and go, what? Like, what are you talking about? And I think that just, again, speaks to like the magic and the virtuosity of a band like
Hmm.
Wilco. And we haven't even gotten to this part yet. Like, this is an almost 6-minute song
Right.
that's 2.5 minutes of song and like 4 minutes almost of just this amazing, like you said, like instrumental piece that has, this dueling guitars section that just will blow your mind. And it really feels like you get to this part, and for me, this song has always been like the story of a one-sided relationship, like no matter how you try and impress the other person, they don't care,
Yeah.
right? They don't care. It doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
you could be Germany, you could be Japan, like one is as unlikely as the other in terms of impressing this person. And then like these dueling guitars at the end feel like this final argument, right? It
Yeah.
literally sounds, if you listen to me, like two people arguing. And it takes you to that point, or again, for me, it takes me to that point where sometimes you're just so tired of trying to figure something out that the only thing you're left with is like this just emotion, and that you get more than half of the song of that in this. Does it resonate in that way for you as well?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I find that that's a great analysis, because you know like sometimes when you're in an argument and you slam the door. I
Yeah.
mean, that's essentially what they're doing. Like, musically, that's
Yeah.
kind of the feeling. But also, it kind of reminds me a little bit of "Turn the Page" by Bob Seger, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of being on the road and being isolated,
Yeah.
and it maybe having an argument long distance,
Yeah.
and like, and then the frustration of not being, I'm in, because sometimes like location too, like it's impossible. I can't articulate what I want to say because I'm not right in front of you.
Yeah.
Sometimes like when you're in a relationship, it's like it's way easier to hash things out and to figure things out when you're face to face. But when you're on the phone, like I don't like having deep conversations on the phone because you can't see the person's face, and
Yeah.
unless you're doing FaceTime, I guess. But it's like, but still, even that is there's that disconnect
There's a
of
barrier.
and so like I feel like I think both can be true. Like you have these like uh you know alienation feelings, but also like you can hear the sadness of not being right there with them, and
Yeah.
so it's very interesting. I think there's the multi layers, the four-dimensional chess that he's writing is
Always.
amazing. So
Always. And for listeners that haven't explored Wilco or that think it's just one thing, just get in there for a second. I promise that your mind will be changed. I actually just bought the new Jeff Tweedy book, World Within a Song. And I'm
okay.
so excited to get into it because the subtitle of it is Music That Changed My Life and Life That Changed My Music. So I'm really excited to sort of see, what he pulls down and what songs were influenced by what for him. So
Oh yeah, I'm
that
really
that'll be an
curious.
interesting read as well. But as we transition out of the Wilco verse, there's so much of it.
Yeah.
I was happy that you brought this song. This is a band that I've explored like lightly, and
Hmm.
so I was interested to dig in a little bit deeper. But your second song is a song called "The Silence" by Manchester Orchestra.
Yeah.
And this is off their 2017 album, A Black Mile to the Surface. And it's really a concept album. You know, if you think of a concept album being defined as sort of an album that plays in a way that you know, the sum is greater than its parts, you know, like it's something that when you listen to the whole thing, I think you take away a different meaning than if you just listen to the songs individually.
Sure.
um and so I'm really curious about how this song came into your life and sort of why this pick this week.
Well, it's fascinating for me because it was one of those songs that kind of just, I don't know if it's like a YouTube algorithm thing or like, you know, you just like, you know, sometimes I do the I do the deep dive autoplay thing because, you know,
Yeah.
uh, I don't know, it kind of just kind of emerged like that kind of way, and it really, you know, it's one of those things too, like, you know, sometimes you have background, you know, you have music in the background, you're just kind of like, you know, that sounds good, but like, you know, you're not really paying attention. And I was doing the dishes, and I had to stop what I was doing and come around to the computer and like sit down and like, you know, deep dive this one. And it was interesting because it really spoke to me because um you know, I could hear lyrically, for me, it was they were speaking about being a father, and
Mm.
trying and almost like declaring their intention, and and um and that really spoke to me because you know, I have a son, and that was something that I did um as a you know, as becoming a father, and like what are the pitfalls of being a father and overcoming, you know, your own trauma and your own wounds, and not inflicting those things on another human being. And I really took that from this song, and 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 I was glad that someone else was doing it too. You know, like that's the coolest thing, because it's like I'm publicly declaring that I'm not going to be, you know, I am dark, but at the same time there's light, and that to me is unbelievable. Like it just
Yeah.
makes you like, okay, there's hope, you know, and that stuff is, you know, and you can tell too. There's like, you know, in some of the lyrics and stuff like that, you know, there's some like, you know, sometimes the kind of trauma is religious based, and
Hmm.
and you can tell from some of this that maybe some of that was, you know, was happening, and I really feel like, um you know, as someone that is you know, I am religious, and I believe in God, and stuff like that, but I also think that you can use that stuff as a weapon, and use it for harm as well as good, and I'm fully aware of that aspect of things, and I am very conscious about being an instrument of peace, and I think that's a very important aspect of believing, you know, believing the way that I do,
Yes.
and I feel like that's kind of what's happening with this song.
Well, and also an instrument of mindfulness, right? I
Mm-hmm.
love that you call that in, that you call in this song as like a conscious declaration, and you yourself made a conscious declaration about how you wanted to move through life as a father, how you wanted to move through life as a religious person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big hope for this show, is that like the more we can kind of mindfully, consciously, out loud declare these things that I know other people are feeling. You know, we have a song about it, right? There's
Yeah.
a song where this band and the lyricist felt compelled to be mindful and make a declaration about how they wanted to parent, which is maybe one of the greatest responsibilities we have in life, right?
Oh
Raising
yeah,
another human.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Like,
so, like, isn't it strange that, like, this is maybe one of the first conversations I've had about making a public declaration about how you want to parent? And it's always been something my husband and I have talked about. We've said we want to raise a critical thinker
yep,
and we want to raise a contributing member to society.
100%.
Those are like two big things for us, right? And those were kind of our declarations. But here we are, like you and I getting this really like cool moment
Mm-hmm.
that this song provided for us where we can make these public declarations, and hopefully other people are like, yeah, I want to be really mindful about the way I'm parenting too, and I'm going to make sure. And even if it sounds silly, I think it's not, right? In order to believe, in order to make anything happen, first you have to think it.
Right.
And so I love that this came up, and I know that you're a mindful person, not just from what you've revealed here, but from your poetry, from the way lyrics like Wilco or lyrics like From the Silence by this song, like the way they affect you. And so I'm really interested in understanding, as a musician who, Wrencove is primarily instrumental, and then you have this sort of separate life where you have your haiku and your poetry.
Mm-hmm.
How does that factor in? Like, is your poetry sort of like a way to express this well of words that you have that don't quite go with what you want to express musically? Like, I was really interested in, like,
Yeah.
he writes music, he writes words, yet the two sort of seem to live a little bit separately. Help me understand. I'm super curious about that.
Sure. It's actually kind of funny because the writing always came first.
All right.
Um, as a, I started, I mean, we're talking about intent, like I was intentionally writing probably like between like sixth and seventh grade. Um, I had a really great humanities teacher, writer guy that was really inspiring. And he like, said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this, like keep moving, and he really encouraged me to write. And, music, I grew up with music, and music has always been a constant too. But I mean, as far as like me personally, because I didn't have a guitar, and like I did the piano lesson thing, but I hated it. And, it was like not really my thing. And, my older sister, she's a classically trained pianist. So it's like, you know, uh, I'm not doing Chopin, like
Right.
I like rock and roll, and so like, and, coming from a religious family too, that wasn't always encouraged,
Right.
is the best way to put it. Rock and roll was not necessarily, especially of a certain era,
Right.
which I come from, because I'm a little bit older, like,
Yep.
there was videos, rock and roll's evil,
Yep.
so, but really, I think, pushing through that, and then finally, being able to play guitar, and I'm self-taught, and so like being, and having great friends around you to push you to make you, do all that. But so I actually started in like indie rock, punk rock bands. So like
Wow.
I did, that was actually my strength, was writing lyrics for the band. So like that was always my in, um, my, because my, especially when I was younger, I wasn't as strong as a musician because of, lack of training.
Right. But
But
lyrically, you could provide some substance to the
yeah, so
band.
I
Yeah.
was useful,
Yeah.
because and that was the thing. I think, when I tell people, I started off as like, I was a percussionist, and I started off as a percussionist, and I started off writing lyrics and booking shows and doing the sound. Like those are the things that I, and then as I got stronger as a guitarist, then I started doing that, and then I was a solo artist for a long time, and and so like that galvanized, like, you got to do the dirty work, and then
Right.
you get to do the awesome stuff later, and that's kind of how I worked. I did the hard work, to get.
And I feel like you hear that in the music, right? When I'm
Yeah.
listening to Wrencove, I feel
Yeah.
like you're really trying to deliver something that is going to be pleasurable to the listener. Like
Yeah.
sometimes when I'm listening to music, I feel like, I don't want to say forced. I mean, sometimes forced is the appropriate word, but I feel like a
Mhm.
lot of times the artist's intentions are really being put on you.
Yeah.
Whereas I felt like when I was listening to Wrencove, like you were really just wanting the listener to have a really beautiful experience, is
Oh,
how I
yeah.
felt. I didn't feel forced in any direction. I just felt comfortable to enjoy.
Yeah.
And maybe that comes from you being on kind of both sides, or a lot of different sides of the musical equation. it felt a little bit more. I felt a little more taken care of, like at I was at a
That's good to
nicer
hear.
restaurant. I wasn't at a drive-through.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not
Right.
McDonald's, and
Right.
that's I think and I think some of that too is the maturity, because I think there were times when I did force that, my
Yeah.
agenda,
Yeah.
and I think, as you get older and stuff, you realize that, okay, I can make a statement without force feeding it to people,
It's true.
and I think that, um and I think some of that too comes from my journey, as far as like, I wasn't even sure when we made Wrencove, I wasn't even sure if I could actually make a record,
Yeah.
because previous to that, so I got injured like 3 years before that, 3 or 4 years before we
Okay.
made that, and I couldn't even play guitar. So like,
Wow.
what happened was, I was chopping wood, and I had a bulging disc, which then pinched the nerve in my left arm,
Okay.
and and so I couldn't fret the guitar, I couldn't play, I couldn't, do anything, and so I had to have surgery and like rehab, and it was a really long, it still is an ongoing process, but it's much better than it was, and so, but it was devastating in the sense of the thing that I worked so hard to do, I couldn't do anymore, and
Right.
so like, my you know my wife's awesome, and so like, she was like, you know she was the one that first was like, you know what, I don't think you can play right now, because I tried and I was like, not
Yeah.
good, and it was like really devastating, and then as I got better and I got better, she started to be like, you know what, maybe you should make a record. And I hadn't made one
Good.
in years, because I was kind of, we were raising our son, and I was being intentional. I mean, I'd play, here and there, but it was kind of a back burner situation. And so she was like, you know what, I think you need to get in the studio. I think you need to work, and see what you can do. And so luckily, I was able to get into a studio. I'm like, oh, I'll just work on 5 songs and see what happens, and and Trees came out, and that's kind of, you know that's kind of how it's been kind of going right now. It's almost like a second chance or a second rebirth kind of situation for me, and so
Yeah.
I'm really grateful, for
And
sure.
another instance where, I don't say this lightly, another instance where music has literally saved someone,
Yeah.
right? Like, I hear stories all the time. And since doing the show, I really do believe that. Like, it
Oh
really
yeah.
has the power to save people, whether again, it's lyrics at the right time, or, being able to learn to do something you love in a new way after an injury, or just the right chords that make you cry. Like, I just think
Oh
that
yeah.
there are so many times and instances and examples that I could give over and over of music literally saving people. And so I love this story. I love that your wife was there to cheer you on to do it too. I think so much that's like such a big part of
Oh yeah.
long-term relationships and partnerships, is that, yeah, sometimes you do have to be there to say, like, maybe not right now, but okay, now, like having that other person that kind of can live in your blind spots a little bit and help you through when you're struggling there. And I think that now hearing your story and then like going back and thinking about your 2 songs, it just kind of all comes full circle and builds this really cool picture of you, Andrew. I love that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty crazy.
That was part 1 of Jenn's interview with Andrew Cloninger of Wrencove. Join us next week to hear Jenn's picks and the rest of their discussion.